Hello and good evening, everyone. This evening, I wanted to share with you what I consider, in my opinion, to be the best account of the terrible accident that happened to Mr. Gurdjieff on the 8th of July, I think it was 1924, when he crashed his Citroën driving at a rapid speed. He had a habit of driving recklessly and going very fast, too fast for the speed limits. And that account is told by the Hartmanns in this book, Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff. I highly recommend it if you're interested in the activity of Mr. Gurdjieff and his ideas, but more so the course of his life when he came and began to take followers, pupils. Olga and Thomas de Hartmann were with him from the beginning and went with him on all of his travels early on through Tiflis and Sochi and Constantinople, and it's all very well documented until they went through Berlin and arrived in Paris at the Prieuré, which Olga de Hartmann actually helped Mr. Gurdjieff to procure. And this account is, again, one of the best I've read for a number of reasons. The first of which is because Olga de Hartmann had become Gurdjieff's secretary and would travel with him in the motor car to Paris and back to and from to Paris, because she would act as his interpreter, his translator, and his secretary. And Thomas de Hartmann, because when Gurdjieff would arrive back to the Prieuré from Paris, they would often go straight to work on the music together. And so you need to understand how close Thomas and Olga de Hartmann were to Mr. Gurdjieff on both a practical level, Olga being his secretary, his translator, and treasurer ultimately, and Thomas de Hartmann being with him for many years and working on the music. If you haven't heard the Gurdjieff de Hartmann piano music, I'd highly recommend you give that a listen. You'll no doubt find it on YouTube. But more than that, more than these practical utilitarian aspects of their relationship, Gurdjieff was their guru, their teacher. And there's many instances where from outside, Mr. Gurdjieff may have put their life in danger, at risk, and pushed them to the utmost limit, but they both recognized that they had to take on these tasks in order to develop their inner world and increase their consciousness. And so I'm going to read two chapters. I titled the video Gurdjieff's Catastrophic Crash, because that's the title of the chapter, chapter 23, Catastrophe. And chapter 24 is New Directions. And so that's why I've titled the video what I have, because after the crash, Mr. Gurdjieff, of course, had to change all of his plans for the Institute, had to, liquidate many of the things that he had begun and set to writing, putting down his thoughts in the All and Everything series, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, Meetings with the Remarkable Men, and Life is Real Only Then When I Am. And if he didn't have that crash, it's very interesting to consider in another universe, in an alternate dimension, what would have happened if the crash didn't occur? What would the Institute be? Perhaps it would be much bigger, it would be flourishing, and there'd be branches all over the world. But because of the crash, Gurdjieff had to wind down many of the physical institutes and focus on his writing. And I suppose for us who lived much later and weren't with Gurdjieff at the time, it's a good thing, because Beelzebub's Tales is to his grandson, of which we are all Beelzebub's grandchildren. So it is for us. And hello there, Graham Fortune. Nice to see you, my friend. And McKay, welcome. And hello there, everyone. And if you're looking forward to hearing about this, this terrible accident, but in hindsight's 2020. So it can help us not to identify with the troubles that might be occurring in our life. And if you're excited for tomorrow, we'll be reading some more Bennett talks on Beelzebubs, if you're interested in everything coming up, consider liking the video, subscribe to the channel, share the show with any of your friends if you know any Gurdjieff interests. And we've nearly finished on the app Walden. Just one more chapter now, the conclusion. We're over halfway through of Beelzebub's Tales, and I've begun uploading some of the Platos that I didn't get round to earlier. And so the link's in the description. You can sign up. And McKay says, thanks for your reading Fahrenheit 451. You saved my grades. I'm very happy to hear that, McKay. Many people seem to be working their way through Fahrenheit 451. It must be on some curriculum somewhere because everyone's reading it or listening to it here at Book Club. So I'm very happy about that. Bonnie, 43 UK, says, I'm looking on Wiki about this man. Very interesting, and it sure is, Bonnie. I suggest you go back on the channel, look in the playlist, and start with Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. That's what I'd always recommend. And Xiam 3000 says, Osiris is the grandson of Ra, and his sunboat spaceship are very interesting. And yes, there's many syncretic similarities across all these traditions. But yes, if you're not familiar with Gurdjieff's ideas, I always recommend one start with In Search of the Miraculous. But for now, this is chapter 23 of Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff by Thomas and Olga de Hartmann, and it's titled Catastrophe. Regular work at the Prieuré began again when Mr. Gurdjieff returned from New York. As a result of the American visit, it was necessary to solve certain equipment problems at the Institute, since about 80 more people had asked to come to the Prieuré at the beginning of the summer. Okay, Toby Hull, send me an email, my friend. You'll find that in the description also, so send me an email and we can discuss. At the same time, Mr. Gurdjieff began again his weekly custom, which he had started over a year before, of driving to Paris for an evening and staying the night at his apartment on 9 Rue de Commandant Marchand. The following morning, my wife would meet him at the Café de la Paix for her secretarial duties, which included acting as translator for new people who came to talk with him, attending to his correspondence, and going to the bank with the checks he received in the mail. Whatever the morning program was, Mr. Gurdjieff left Paris at 3 in the afternoon to drive to the Prieuré, invariably taking my wife with him. Although during these trips he was generally silent, there were some occasions when she could speak with him, and he would give her directives for the work at the Prieuré, or for herself. My wife had to deal with wholesale houses in order to get the best prices on the new equipment for rooms, laundry and kitchen, and as Mr. Gurdjieff wished to change his apartment at the end of June, she had to look for a new one. It was also during this period that Mr. Gurdjieff told her that it was an unnecessary inconvenience for him to have to sign checks, sometimes interrupting his talks with people. He therefore put all the money of the Prieuré in a bank account in her name. This worried her greatly, and she asked the director of the bank, whom she knew, to accept her letter, in which she stated that the money in her name actually belonged to Mr. Gurdjieff. So this is another clear distinction, a clear sign that the trust that Gurdjieff had in Olga de Hartmann, he put all of the Prieuré's finances in her name. This she did without telling him, of course. The money question was always a great problem to her. When checks arrived, she had many accumulated bills to pay. There were also taxes, insurance, and the mortgage to think of. She knew that sometimes Mr. Gurdjieff expected her to bring him some of the money, but often, after having paid the indispensable bills, there was nothing left over. I remember once Mr. Gurdjieff planned to take a trip as soon as some money arrived. It arrived, but after she had paid the bills, only 100 francs remained. What can you do with 100 francs? Most of the time, Mr. Gurdjieff accepted it indifferently and was not at all annoyed. Sometimes he pretended to blame her for paying the bills instead of thinking of his needs for money, but she always had the feeling that she had to pay all the debts of the Prieuré first and only afterwards dispose of the rest of the money. It was always a hard task for her. And yes, Quentin Springer, Quentin Springer says Gurdjieff was known as a very bad driver. I would maybe change the word bad to reckless. He was a reckless driver, which I suppose is could be synonymous with bad, but not bad in the sense of what word am I looking for? Klutz, you know. Some people just have little dings and donks and are unaware. I think he was very aware, but he would drive recklessly. And Tatiana's design, hello there and welcome. So this is still Thomas de Hartmann, and then we will move to Olga and her account in one moment. So still Thomas. On Tuesday, the 8th of July, 1924, Mr. Gurdjieff was expected at the Prieuré at about 5 o'clock, as always. I waited for him because he liked to work with me on music upon his return from Paris. I happened to be passing near the front gate when the bell sounded. A gendarme entered, asking if this was the house of Gurdjieff. On hearing that it was, he informed me that Mr. Gurdjieff had had an automobile accident and had been taken by ambulance unconscious to the hospital in Fontainebleau. The ground opened under my feet. All dreams, all hopes of further work collapsed. I went to the hospital immediately with Dr. Sternwall. We stayed until the next morning, when we brought Mr. Gurdjieff home, still quite unconscious. What had happened, my wife will describe in her own words. Hello there, Donna. Donna Harper, nice to see you. Long time. I hope you and the family are well. And yes, I think Olga, if you're talking about Olga de Hartmann, she was a very good housekeeper, I imagine, and secretary and treasurer. So now we move, I think the remainder of much of the chapter is Olga de Hartmann's account with, again, Thomas de Hartmann's account interspersed, but the majority of it is Olga, because, again, she would travel this journey with Mr. Gurdjieff often. So this is now Olga writing. That morning, instead of going to the Café de la Paix, I went to the new apartment I had found for him on the boulevard Prieuré. Mr. Gurdjieff had planned to go outside the city to look at a quantity of equipment I was preparing to buy for the Prieuré. To my astonishment, he was not ready, and when I reminded him that we had to start immediately, he said, "Oh, telephone that we will come tomorrow." This surprised me even more, knowing how considerate and gentle Mr. Gurdjieff was when it concerned people outside the work, though certainly not with us. I told him the store manager would be very annoyed, but he was quite firm and told me to phone him that we would come tomorrow. Then Mr. Gurdjieff said to write at once to my parents in Leningrad, telling them to sell everything of ours and theirs and come to the Prieuré, because soon there would be a serious famine. Later, he and I went to his garage, and he asked me to tell the mechanic to check his Citroën thoroughly, especially the steering wheel. He told me he would be having lunch at an Armenian restaurant to do some personal business, after which he would take the car and drive directly to the Prieuré. I was to return to his new apartment to make an inventory and then take the train back to the Prieuré alone. I was again astonished and, of course, disappointed, because Mr. Gurdjieff always took me back in the car. I liked that very much, because then I could ask him many questions, and sometimes we stopped in the forest and sat still, which was my greatest pleasure. It was July and very hot, and I would have a lot of packages to take back to the Prieuré. I didn't know why he couldn't come and fetch me before going to Fontainebleau. I returned to the apartment and finished my inventory about 3 o'clock. I telephoned the garage to see if Mr. Gurdjieff's car was still there, so I could put my packages in it. They told me he had just left. My train was not due to leave until 5 o'clock, and as I was feeling very tired, I sat down in an armchair in front of the window, which was on the ground floor, and fell asleep. Then suddenly I heard the voice of Mr. Gurdjieff calling me. "Olga Arkadievna, are you there? Let us go." I jumped up and looked out the window, thinking that he had changed his mind and come to get me, but neither Mr. Gurdjieff nor his car was there. I thought perhaps he had called, and, as I did not answer, he had just gone away. I asked the concierge, "Did Mr. Gurdjieff pass by?" She said she had not seen him, although she had been sitting by the entrance for some time. I looked at my watch. It was 4:30, just time for me to take a taxi and catch my train. And hello there, Stephen Lan, welcome. One of our pupils met me at the station at Fontainebleau. From his face I saw at once that something had happened and asked, "What is it? Is Mr. Gurdjieff back already?" He said, "Yes, he is back." But I saw that there was something he did not tell me. I insisted, so he said that Mr. Gurdjieff had had an accident on the highway and was now in the hospital. I ran up the steps from the station to the street, stopped a truck and persuaded the driver to take me to the hospital. There I found my husband and Dr. Sternwohl, who took me into a private room where Mr. Gurdjieff was. It was terrible to see him lying unconscious with his head and hands all bandaged. There was no opportunity to ask my husband what had happened, but a pupil told me that quite by chance a gendarme on a bicycle had seen a car smashed against a tree with the steering wheel broken. He found Mr. Gurdjieff lying unconscious on the ground, his head upon a double cushion that had been taken out of the automobile. Who could have taken out this cushion and laid Mr. Gurdjieff's head on it? Nobody was around. Shortly afterwards, an ambulance passed by which stopped and took Mr. Gurdjieff to the hospital. He was identified by a card found in his pocket. In the hospital was a very good surgeon, Dr. Martry, who at once did all the bandaging necessary. Later, we thought that perhaps somebody had caused the accident and robbed Mr. Gurdjieff, but I looked in his pocket where I knew he had a diamond that he had just bought, and everything was in place. Now I began to understand all my apprehensions since the morning, which I had tried to overcome and do what I had to do. Now I really experienced for myself the sense and meaning of life with Mr. Gurdjieff and understood the significance of his personality for all of us. I felt as if without him the forces of life would stop, and that if he died, all that lives would die. I felt that his whole life's work would be undone. Such fright overcame me at this idea that, at the same time, another feeling rose up, and I told myself, if God exists, it cannot happen. If God exists, Mr. Gurdjieff lives, so he will not die. Perhaps there will be weeks or months of incapacity, but he will live, because he has to live. Hi there, Laurie. Hello and welcome. Welcome. I repeated all the time within myself, if God exists. Now, as awful as it was in my heart, I had this faith that Mr. Gurdjieff would live, and the only thing left to do was to act. We decided that our two Russian doctors in Paris, both well known, one a surgeon and the other a general practitioner, should be summoned at once. I went to find the doctor who had admitted Mr. Gurdjieff to the hospital to ask for his permission to have our Russian doctors come and for the actual facts of Mr. Gurdjieff's condition. After much difficulty, I finally located him at a dinner party. He was quite willing to have our doctors come to see Mr. Gurdjieff and told me that his condition was quite critical. There were severe head injuries and lacerations of the hands, but as far as he could tell, no fractures. The only thing he was afraid of was that Mr. Gurdjieff had had a major concussion. I was happy to know that Mr. Gurdjieff was under the care of a nice man who was a good surgeon and that his life did not seem to be in immediate danger. Only then, when I heard that, could I cry for the first time. That same evening I tried to write about the main experiences that we had had during our stay in the Institute, now that we saw all the old aims and questions in quite a new light. At the same time, this writing would perhaps serve to inform those who are not at the Institute during this period. The accident and the time following it brought such serious results for the whole life of the Institute that each little detail, if only from the point of view of my personal understanding, would be very interesting. Mr. Gurdjieff's teaching now began to be understood in a different way. Oh, hello there, Rich. Hello, Rich, and everyone else. Welcome, guys. Dr. Sternwohl went to the scene of the accident to see if he could find some sign of what had happened. Mr. Gurdjieff was quite a good driver, and the road was wide enough for a car to pass. Even if he had to drive off the road through the grass, it was not necessary to hit a tree. Perhaps the steering wheel broke before the accident. All kinds of thoughts entered everyone's head. I must say that at this time I was interested as to why or how the accident happened, only if it could help the doctors in one way or another. At 6 o'clock in the morning, our two Russian doctors, Alexinsky and Sirotinin, arrived from Paris to see Mr. Gurdjieff. They confirmed the diagnosis that no bones were broken and that, although the concussion appeared to be very severe, the actual condition would be known only after several days. They thought it was quite possible that he had had only a hemorrhage because when his eyes were open they reacted to light, though they were very dull. Perhaps at this moment I understood how, in the reality, the eyes of Mr. Gurdjieff reflected his whole being, and it seemed to me that if his eyes would open, everything would be as before. The doctors decided that the best thing to do would be to take Mr. Gurdjieff back to the Prieuré. They moved him very carefully onto a stretcher and brought him there in an ambulance. When they put him in his bed, he opened his eyes for a second and even made some little movements with his right hand, but again fell into an unconscious state. The time that followed seemed to be divided into definite periods. During the first period, when he was unconscious all the time, one had the feeling that not he himself was ill, but only his body, and that he looked from somewhere on himself, examining, trying to move, but unable to say anything. That was why we were so afraid of doing something that would perhaps hinder him from doing what was necessary for himself. From another point of view, we understood very well that there were really necessary physical things that had to be done. Now we are back to Thomas the Hartmann speaking. Madame Ostrovsky, of course, had all the worry and responsibility for taking care of him. My wife and I offered to share shifts with her at his bedside, which she accepted. I took on myself the night shift. During those first few nights, Mr. Gurdjieff lay motionless, completely quiet and without any signs of consciousness. On one of these occasions I was very tired, and in spite of all efforts to keep awake, at one moment my head involuntarily sank in deep sleep on my chest, as had happened once before during movements in the lime tree alley. Suddenly I heard a voice, not at all a physical voice coming from the lips of Mr. Gurdjieff, but some kind of very real voice inside me that said clearly, "Keep your head straight." I was wide awake at once, and did not fall asleep again. Back to Olga, so we go back and forth, Olga Thomas, but back to Olga. From the first we could distinguish when he really slept from when he was not asleep but only lay without movement and with eyes closed. We could tell what was necessary to do and what he wished because we had a feeling that he helped us. If he wished to drink, he made a very slight movement with his hand when we asked him, but if he didn't wish to drink, he pushed our hands away, sometimes with force, and turned his head away from us. The first 2 days it was not even possible for him to drink. We only wet his lips with a damp cloth. He began to be restless again, and the French doctor wished to give him an injection of morphine, but Mr. Gurdjieff made indications that he didn't wish it, and we all decided against it. So even when he's unconscious, he's lying unconscious in bed and he's still directing people. After the 3rd or 4th day, the doctors said that there was no danger to his life, but they could not tell how long it would take for the normal state of his brain to return. They said that there had to be a great stillness around him, that nothing should waken him artificially, so we waited patiently for the happy day when he would awaken by himself. On the 3rd day, when the French doctor replaced the bandages, he told me to hold Mr. Gurdjieff's hand so that he would not instinctively try to pull them off. I tried to take his hand, but he put his fingers in a fist and would not move them. When the doctor said au revoir, Mr. Gurdjieff bent his head. There were other moments when he said something, but they were only moments, and then he would fall asleep again. Finally, on the 6th day, he opened his eyes. He called his wife and asked her, "Where am I?" When my husband entered the next room, he asked, "Who is there?" When he was told it was my husband, he said, "Oh, let him come in." Back to Thomas. That afternoon, after I had had my sleep, I dropped into Mr. Gurdjieff's room to see how he was, and to my inexpressible joy, I saw again his former self, freshly awakened, his eyes luminous with kindness. I could not restrain myself from expressing my happiness. I was not needed just then, so I went to the dining room to have some breakfast. Afterwards, when I returned to his room, I was astounded by the change in Mr. Gurdjieff's face. It was not at all the same Mr. Gurdjieff I had seen before my breakfast, but the face of an abnormal man. His attention was drawn to the big painting by Sticker of Arabs praying by the desert. His wife had to perform their ritual gestures several times before he quieted down. Back to Olga. Once again, for 2 days, he slept and slept. Then it was a Wednesday. For the first time, he began to eat, apparently even with pleasure. There were very peaceful days, but there were also days when he was extremely restless. He began to ask us in a very serious tone to give him one cigarette after another, saying that he needed them. We had to be aware of when it really was necessary, and at the same time to learn how to keep him from smoking all the time. It was very difficult to understand what to do in each case. For example, one day Mr. Gurdjieff told me, take down the second picture from the wall. Take down the second picture from the wall. But there was only one picture, which I took down. Later we understood that, owing to the concussion, he must have seen 2 things instead of 1. Suddenly, one day, Mr. Gurdjieff said that he wished to get dressed, and to our horror, he actually went into the garden, ordering someone to follow him with an armchair. He went out near the chicken coop, where, in general, he never went, and told us to bring an axe, chop down a tree, cut it into logs, and make a fire. Then he returned to his room. Mr. Gurdjieff did not seem to remember the accident at all. He questioned us several times about what had happened, but each time it was clear that he was picturing it differently. When he asked me where he had been before setting out for the Prieuré, and I told him he had lunched chez Simonian, he did not seem to remember even that. He decided he wanted to see for himself the scene of the accident. He told me, let the old car be brought and let us go together and see where the accident took place. I spontaneously said, Mr. Gurdjieff, you cannot drive the car, and I do not know how to drive. But he insisted and began to be agitated, as he was still quite ill. I knew that if I refused, he would ask someone else to go with him. I decided it was better to tell him, all right, Mr. Gurdjieff, I will only go upstairs first, and then they will bring your car. I called someone and asked him to bring the car to the door while I put on my hat. When I came back, the man was standing beside the car. I asked him to go and get Mr. Gurdjieff and tell him that the car was at the front door and that I was ready. As soon as he went away, I bent down in the car and, with a pair of scissors that I had taken from my room, I cut the accelerator wire. Olga de Hartmann being very mischievous there, cutting the accelerator wire. Mr. Gurdjieff came down, sat in his place, and I sat in my seat, as peaceful as a saint. He began to pump the accelerator with his foot, and nothing happened. He was quite annoyed and said, "What is wrong? What is that?" The man who brought the car said, "When I brought it, it worked very well." Then I added, "The car has stood in the garage for weeks. It is damp and rusted. When he first began to run it out of the garage, it worked, but then it broke. We will send it to the garage for repairs and go tomorrow." Mr. Gurdjieff went to his room and forgot about his idea of seeing where the accident took place. Hello there, HR. Hi there. Welcome. Months later, when he was quite himself again, I asked him, "Do you remember that you could not go and see where the accident took place when you once wished it?" He said, "Yes, something was broken in the car." I asked him if he knew how it got broken, and he said, "No." I told him very peacefully that I had done it. Mr. Gurdjieff became as red as a tomato with anger and said, "Only you would permit yourself to play me such a trick." But then, in a second, he turned and, with quite a different face, said, "Fortunately, you dared to do it, because I understand now that if I had driven then, you and I would both be dead." Back to Thomas. In those weeks immediately after the accident, we never knew what to expect. One day Mr. Gurdjieff went to the study house. As he was walking in, Madame de Salzmann whispered to me, "Already he is acting." He did not take his usual place, but went inside the fence and sat down on the cushions on the left side near the piano. He summoned several pupils to stand on the rugs in front of him and showed them a new movement, beginning with left movements, steps backward, to the right, to the left, forward, back again, and so on in a very complicated combination. And when the movement ended, it came out that all were back in their original starting positions. For me, it was inconceivable to think that a man out of his mind could invent such a complicated combination. On the contrary, I think that even a normal man is hardly likely to be able to do so. Back to Olga. Later, when Mr. Gurdjieff began to walk more and more on some days to try to give orders about everything, it was really a nightmare. We felt that he did it all from excited nerves and that nothing could stop him. At the same time, we knew it could be harmful for him. He began to come to the study house in the evenings. We were all very worried that it would make too strong an impression on him and that he would not be able to get him home. As always, he asked those who led the movements and showed the position. Jean, Lily, Nina, what are the pupils working on? And he asked my husband to play the music. The first time it happened, we decided to go away at 10 o'clock, so that even if Mr. Gurdjieff wished to stay longer, he would see that everyone had gone, and so would leave too. But later we could not even do that anymore. He ordered everything himself, as before. It was not long before Mr. Gurdjieff insisted anew on going to the scene of the accident. That was quite an event. We rented a car with a driver, and my husband and I accompanied Mr. Gurdjieff to the fateful place, all of us for the first time. It was at a crossroads near the hamlet of Chiali, on the main road from Paris to Fontainebleau. Mr. Gurdjieff got out and inspected everything around the area. He began to make suppositions and draw conclusions, finally settling on what seemed the only possible version. He was travelling at high speed along this stretch, for the road was in good condition and straight as an arrow, when suddenly a car came out of the side road in front of him, blocking his way. To avoid an inevitable collision, he swerved off the road to the right, around a signpost at the corner, and headed for a grassy space between some trees. Here a second obstruction faced him. To reach the grass, the car had to get over a low stone embankment. Consequently, he had to hold the steering wheel very tightly. From the shock of hitting and lurching over this obstacle, the steering wheel itself snapped, its wooden ring falling to the floor where it was found later. The wheel could not have broken before this point, since the tracks left by the car before mounting the embankment were perfectly straight. From the spot where the steering wheel broke to the tree where they found the crushed vehicle was not a great distance. All the evidence showed that during those few seconds before the automobile hit the tree, Mr. Gurdjieff was working with the brake while trying to maneuver the car by holding on to the stump of the steering column with the help of his hat, before opening the door to jump out of the car himself. His car was a Citroën decisively, whose door closed so tightly that he would have to give it a very strong push to open it. We don't know exactly what happened after that. Seeing that he was bleeding badly, he somehow managed to get a seat cushion out of the car to lie down on, after which he lost consciousness. When they found him, he was covered with mud and blood, and by the stains on his clothing, they concluded that he had been trying to reach his pocket handkerchief. In a word, it is clear that Mr. Gurdjieff was not in the car when it struck the tree, and that the breaking of the steering wheel made the accident much more extreme. Oh yeah, that's right, guys. And when Gurdjieff was ill, and when he talks about it in the other writings, of course he says, this unfortunate accident, right, that happened to his body, and he does distinguish, the soul and the body and how they are separate entities, and that, what is, I think St. Paul said, the spirit is willing but the body is unable, I think, something like that. And someone in the chat, if you remember it, I believe it's St. Paul. And And yes, Donna makes a good comment here. Times of illness for some make it clear the separation between body and soul, or the limitations of the flesh and the craved freedom of the mind. So yes, it's very clear, and also it can be quite a profound experience when one is ill, whether that's a broken bone or a severe fever or whatever's going on, to try and create that separation, to not be identified with the body. If you're identified very strongly with the body and wish not to be ill, that's where all the suffering comes. Whereas if you disidentify with the body and accept the current state of the being, then you can get on much better. But of course, it's easier said than done. Back to Thomas de Hartmann. When Mr. Gurdjieff grew stronger and was able to walk further afield with the help of his wife or one of us, he returned to the idea of making fires. He told some of the men to go with us into the park near the far vegetable garden where tall, old poplar trees were growing. One after another he had them cut down and made into big bonfires. Fire evidently pleased Mr. Gurdjieff. He told us that he drew force from it. But as none of these pupils knew much about cutting trees, the trunks were falling in every direction. We can never understand why Mr. Gurdjieff wanted such large fires, since they were so dangerous with these inexperienced people. The period of convalescence was really a great trial for all of us. Mr. Gurdjieff's strange behaviour lasted a long time. I think Madame de Salzmann was right in saying that, although the accident was real, his continued strangeness was mainly acting. If he had seemed fully himself, we would have reverted to our old ways, always asking him what we should do about everything. Throughout his illness, we were on our own and had to depend on ourselves for every decision. Even when we consulted with the doctors, we were careful to check their advice against our own instinctive feelings so as not to do anything harmful. It gradually became obvious that, though his body had been gravely affected, inside Gurdjieff remained Gurdjieff. It gradually became obvious that, though his body had been gravely affected inside, Gurdjieff remained Gurdjieff. His acting had been in part to test how far we were capable of carrying on his work without him. We felt that now, inside at least, he could do everything, and that he knew everything, and that it was ridiculous to try, so to speak, to tell him what to do. And at the same time, my wife and I, and Mr. Gurdjieff's wife, also saw very clearly that in his body he was not well, that he was not the same as before, that something had not yet come back to him. Even his sight was impaired. We felt we had to protect him, though we might be wrong. We did not know his real condition. How could we? But to let him do everything like a healthy person was not possible. We felt obliged to stop him and to try to do it in such a way that no one could notice it and that he himself would not realize our intention if he really were still not quite recovered. Back to Olga, she says, "We were not prepared for what happened next. On the 26th of August 1924, Mr. Gurdjieff dictated to me a whole speech which he wished to give in the evening. He called everyone after dinner to come to the salon. He did not wish to speak after 2 phrases, and he told me to read what he had dictated earlier." And this final section of the chapter is the speech that Mr. Gurdjieff dictated to Olga de Hartmann and what she read to the pupils. So this is a speech dictated by Gurdjieff. "I was very ill. Now, thank God, I feel better and continue to be better. What happened to me, how it happened, I do not know. I remember nothing. I went to the place where it happened and imagined how it happened. There are not many people who could speak with you like this after such an accident. In principle, I had to die, but accidentally I stayed alive. Now I am healthy, only my memory is weak. At first I had no memory at all, then it was weak. When I walked and spoke with you in the beginning, I forgot everything. That is why, if during this time I have done something disagreeable, if I have offended you, some of you, I ask you to forgive me. Only a few days back I began to live as before. My memory came back and I can live as before, not as an animal. So I repeat, to whomever I said something disagreeable, you have to forget it. I had also forgotten everything that I did, and only 3 or 4 days ago I began to remember. When I came back to myself, my first thought was, did I die or not? How will everything be now? And what about the Institute? I saw that I was alive and decided to close the Institute for many reasons. First of all, there are very few people who understand. I gave all my life for my work, but the result from other people in general was not good, and this is why I think it is not necessary for those few to sacrifice their lives here, and I don't wish to continue as I have done until now. All my life I gave up all my money to other people, but now I have decided to close the Institute. Forgive me. I wish now to live for myself and tell everyone that the Institute is closed. I will liquidate this house. There are many people here. They can live here as guests. I always received guests for 2 weeks, and now my house is also open for 2 weeks, but later I will ask everyone to leave. All the same, I cannot throw away all my work. Now everyone has to think. Does he wish to go away tomorrow or in 2 weeks? I always help people, and now I will also help them to arrange their affairs. In the meantime, those who stay here will be only guests, but they will have to fulfill all the rules that existed. Even new people will have to do that. Those who don't do that will have to leave at once. In 2 weeks, I will begin a new work. The names of those who may stay will be posted. Others will have to leave. But even now, life will continue and duties will be carried out by those whom I ask. Others, if they wish to work, can work in the garden, in the kitchen garden, and in the woods. But they have to ask me and live as guests. Before I could look after everything myself. Now I cannot do it any more and cannot oversee everything. This way everything will be written out in advance. When I am here I will look after it all myself, but my assistants will be Madame de Hartmann and in the household Madame Ostrovsky, Mr. Gurdjieff's wife. Tomorrow I will say who will be on duty. Meanwhile it will be Dr. Sternwohl and Mr. de Hartmann and some others. Each one has to ask himself, does he wish to stay or not? But I hope that now it will be better than before. Again, I repeat that the Institute is closed. I died. The reason is that I was disenchanted with people after all that I have done for them, and I have seen now how well they have paid me for it. Now, inside of me, everything is empty. That is my first reason. The second reason is that I wish to live for myself. I have to rest and use all the time for myself. I don't wish to continue as before, and my new principle is everything for myself. From today the Institute will be nothing. My work will be different, and those who are not invited cannot come to this work. Tomorrow you will tell me who wishes to stay, but for now, it is enough. Very interesting speech there. I'd forgotten all about that final speech, but yes, that's a very serious and important point in the work, right? Him sharing everyone who's there already at the Prieuré that we're closing it down. The Institute is closed. Everyone has to leave either tomorrow or in 2 weeks. And now this next chapter is chapter 24, and its title is New Directions. And this is when Mr. Gurdjieff again gets more energy back and decides to begin writing the All and Everything series, which is again a very interesting turn of events. Because of course he could have not written anything. So how life turns, hey? Toby says, the way I would put it, I drifted and acted in conflict with my inner voice. I was acting in a way that was basically out of tune with my soul. Bad childhood programming was perhaps the root cause. And yeah, guys, many things can go into it, right? Many things can go into these things. So it's very intense experiences at times, isn't it? A terrible accident or a terrible illness, it sort of shocks the soul. And I had a friend of mine, I won't share his name. I won't say his name, but he was in a terrible car crash. And he's telling me after the fact that, in a sense, it was a near-death experience. His soul left his body, and he could see, could walk around the car crash, see his body there, mangled in the car, but he wasn't in the car. So again, many people have had these experiences, and they call them in the literature, don't they? NDEs, near-death experiences. And there's many atheists, secular atheists, who don't believe in anything outside of the body and outside of physics. But after these near-death experiences, they completely change their tune and, of course, recognize something does happen after death because they've experienced it. Donna says, the only time I heard the phrase soul mentioned was in the context of religion, mainly Christianity, and the hypocrisy I knew about religion put me off learning much more about that when I was a young child, that is. And yes, that's right, Donna. Many people, especially children, right? Children, in a sense, have a capacity for hypocrisy because they're very attentive, aren't they? They're watching everything. And in a sense, what you say doesn't really matter because they've already seen exactly what you're doing. And so, yeah, very good point. Very good point there, Donna. And Stephen says, me too, I got smashed up by a car accident in 1972. Never been right since. Wow. So everyone seems to, maybe it's sort of a prerequisite for the seeking of spiritual knowledge and spiritual truths, that the soul recognizes there's something else. Again, not to put words in all the chat's mouth, but it must be something about that, right? If someone's a secular atheist and doesn't believe in anything, and then they have a near-death experience or a separate subject, a very intense psychedelic experience, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, there is, I believe, I'm a believer. And hello there, Old Duck Good Egg says, thanks, loves, you're very welcome. And hi there, Philo says, good afternoon or evening. We're in the evening over here in the UK, 9:50, and we'll read one more chapter. Hello there, Philo, welcome. We'll read one more chapter, and then we'll all go off to bed. This chapter is called New Directions. Hey, Jiam, thanks for sharing these insights. Very wonderful insights there. Jiam, how do I pronounce that first name? Jiam, I'm going for. Jiam 3000 says the soul is a higher being body that can only be born from the second Kesdran light being body, according to Gurdjieff in Beelzebub's Tales. Very interesting. Right. New Directions. Remaining in the Prieuré after the closure were Madame Ostrovsky, Doctor and Madame Sternville with their son Nikolai, the de Salzmans with Busick and Michel, Miss Merston, Miss Gordon, Lily Golamien, Nina Lavrova, Bernard Metz, Rachmilovich, famous character in the Fritz Peters series, Rachmilovich, and the two of us, of course, Thomas and Olga de Hartmann, along with members of Mr. Gurdjieff's family, his mother, his sister Sophia, with her husband, his nephew Valya, and his niece Lucy. The rest soon dispersed. There remained only those few of us, and at the same time there remained the same pile of work required to maintain a huge estate. In September, Mr. Gurdjieff summoned us all to Paradou. He told us to bring picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, and the pig pull cart, and set us to work. In 2 months, his brother Dmitri, with his wife and 3 daughters, would arrive and live there. He wanted us to landscape an unfinished area between Paradou and the alley of the study house. It was very heavy work, earth to dig up, big stones to split, and then to reshape the surroundings. We laid out a garden with a flower bed and path through it to Paradou, all of which was ready when the family arrived. Mr. Gurdjieff's money was again reaching rock bottom. We had to eat, but all of us were moneyless. Meals were reduced to fresh white bread and soup with pieces of beef. How happy we all were on those days when lentil soup was served. But no matter how poor our soups were, They were always tasty. The difficult times did not continue for long. News came from Orage that a lady, well-wisher of Mr. Gurdjieff, had heard about his accident and was sending $10,000 to help his work. Our food now became richly varied. To taste life fully was one of Mr. Gurdjieff's principles. To taste life fully. I like that very much. To taste life fully was one of Mr. Gurdjieff's principles. During our life with him, we tried every sort of Eastern dish, some extremely exotic. He told us that in the East they have always paid particular attention to the refinement of food elements. During festivals, they sometimes serve meals of more than 50 dishes. The aim of such feasts is not so much to gorge oneself under the table, but rather to sample in tiny portions all kinds of variation of taste experiences. Now we switch over to Olga de Hartmann. The number of people at the Prieuré gradually grew again, but never on the former scale. Although to outside appearances life continued as before the accident, it was not the same and caused us great concern. The health of Mr. Gurdjieff himself did not improve as fast as we expected, and Madame Ostrovsky also was not well. Another very great strain for us personally was the arrival in November of my parents and my younger sister Zoya. I said before that they came because Mr. Gurdjieff insisted on the morning of his accident that I write and tell them to come without delay. Surely he had a premonition of what was to happen in Leningrad. Rooms were prepared for my parents next to us in the monks' corridor and for my sister next to Lena Lavrova. My parents stayed until 1929. They were too old to take part in our activities, and that annoyed them. What was most difficult for them and made them suffer was the ruthless manner in which Mr. Gurdjieff very often spoke with us all, his pupils. We also suffered from it, but we knew we were there for a reason, so we accepted it. Oh, hello there, Diane. Hello, Diane, and welcome to a live reading. And so this is the difference again. We read briefly, didn't we, in the Catherine Mansfield readings I did, that of course Olga de Hartmann's parents aren't in the work. They don't understand. So when Mr. Gurdjieff is being very rude and harsh with the pupils, they don't understand. But as Olga and Thomas are saying, they do understand why they are there, and so they can accept Mr. Gurdjieff's harsh manner with them. One morning I saw Mr. Gurdjieff and my father sitting on a bench in the garden. I had to ask Mr. Gurdjieff a quite simple question. In answer, he shouted at me in a terrible way, and I saw that my poor father was ready to leave. But Mr. Gurdjieff turned to him and said, "You see, father, what you make me do? You never shouted at your daughter, so she has not had this experience, and all sorts of impressions are necessary for people. So now I am obliged to do it in your place." That's a pretty harsh statement to Olga's father. My father's attitude changed, and I could see from the expression on his face that he understood how everything Mr. Gurdjieff did for us was to give us new experiences. Still Olga. Hey Diane, I'm very happy to hear that from Utah. I'm glad you're enjoying it, so welcome. During his recovery, Mr. Gurdjieff could not sleep very well at night, whether he was at the Prieuré or as it is at his apartment in Paris, and often wakened one of us to bring him coffee and stay with him. And even when he was practically well, Mr. de Salzmann and my husband often came to sit with him before he fell asleep. Since very little money was coming in, and since the only ones who had any money of their own, Dr. Sternwohl and my husband, had already given it to Mr. Gurdjieff, Mr. de Salzmann and my husband had to go to Paris by day to earn money for the Prieuré. De Salzmann painted cafe walls with murals, and my husband composed music for films. On one occasion, when I took Mr. Gurdjieff coffee at night, he asked me, "Could you write what I will dictate to you? Are you too sleepy?" I said, "I can. I am not sleepy." "Then bring your notebook." He began to dictate in Russian a kind of melodrama where brothers killed each other and so on and so on. I wrote practically 3 pages before Mr. Gurdjieff stopped and asked, "Does it please you?" With my usual directness, I told him in all sincerity that I felt it was awful and revolting and that I'd like to throw it away. Mr. Gurdjieff very quietly told me, "All right, throw it in the waste paper basket. We will write something else. Perhaps it will please you better." With great pleasure, I tore out the 3 pages and threw them away. Mr. Gurdjieff began to dictate again. Quote, "It happened in the 123rd year after the creation of the world. Through space flew the ship Karnak." He did not stop dictating till I had written 3 pages, and I sat there, quite transported to another sphere. He asked, "Does it please you now? Do you wish to continue?" I could not even utter a word, but he understood from my face how happy I was. It took place on the 16th of December 1924 at 47 Boulevard Prieuré. On that night, Mr. Gurdjieff called his task "The Conversation of the Old Devil with the Young One." The manuscript began without any preface. And so here, this is absolutely fantastic, and I had forgotten and overlooked this aspect of the new directions of the work, that, again, the power of these memoirs. That's why I highly recommend everyone become familiar with them, because here we have Olga de Hartmann's the first draft, if you like. The manuscript began. So this is the very beginning of Beelzebub's Tales, the very first time Mr. Gurdjieff had dictated it to Olga de Hartmann, and here she notes it down verbatim. So this was the very first time Gurdjieff had spoke these words in order to be dictated. So this is it. It happened in the 123rd year after the creation of the world. Through space flew the ship Karnak. It was on its way from Sirius via the Milky Way to the planet Caritas. On the ship was Beelzebub, travelling with his kinsman and his household. He was returning to his home after quite extraordinary events, and at the request of his old friends he had consented to and taken part in a conference about these events. Excuse me. Although he was already old, and such a long journey with all its unavoidable hardships was not an easy task at his age, nevertheless, in remembrance of his long-standing friendships, he had decided to accept this invitation. Only a few months before this trip, he had returned to his native land, and, having spent many years far away in very difficult conditions, and this long and extraordinary life after such inexorable terms, had left a deep imprint on his health. That's right, Donna. I'll read that comment when we finish, so I've already broken this up too much by looking at my phone and coughing, so I'll get to it. Time itself had aged him, and the unusual conditions of life had brought him to an exceptional old age, him who in former times had had an uncommonly strong, fiery, and handsome youth. Long, long before, when he still lived in the solar system absolute among others like himself, he was among the attendants of his endlessness, our Lord God. At that time Beelzebub, due to his boiling and turbulent reason, which because of his youth was not yet fully formed, and due to his inexperience, his unrestrained and stormy thought, and the narrowness of his understanding, peculiar to every young mind, having perceived in the way the world was run something that, according to his understanding, was illogical, and having found support among other young minds like his own, mixed himself up in what was none of his business. His interference, due to his tempestuous and vigorous nature, captivated the minds of many and brought this great kingdom to the brink of revolution. Having learned of this, his endlessness, in spite of his all-embracing love, was obliged to send him away into exile to a remote slum, the system Orus, whose inhabitants call it the solar system, and decreed that the place of his existence should be on one of the planets of this particular system, which they call Mars. The exile of Beelzebub was shared by many of his kinsmen and servants, and also by many of his sympathizers. They arrived at this remote place with all of their families and households, and in the course of years a colony was established on this planet, encountering all the inevitable events that occur in such cases. Little by little the population accustomed itself to its new world, and even found occupations both on this planet as well as on those nearby, little islands lost in the big universe, on which nature was poorly endowed, and the people lived there for many long years, which the inhabitants there call centuries. Sounds like Elon Musk's plan to terraform the planet Mars and the population accustom itself to its new world. So that's the excuse me. Donna Harper says the seed of Beelzebub sprouted into fruition at this very moment. Interesting. And Philo says this was when Mars was like Earth before it lost its atmosphere. And yes, who knows? He doesn't state that. And maybe these beings from Caritas and the other solar system, maybe they can breathe. They don't have the issue of the three brain beings breeding on the planet Earth. And so here, Olga de Hartmann continues. So Beelzebub was born, and on the first draft, from the beginning to the last page, Mr. Gurdjieff worked only with me. Once he had begun to write Beelzebub, he continued almost without stopping, day and night, at the café in Fontainebleau, the Café de la Paix in Paris, which was his headquarters, and during his trips. He wrote himself or dictated to me. Then I had to type it. He corrected, and I had to retype again, sometimes as often as 10 times. When Mr. Gurdjieff found that the Russian text had taken the form he wished, my husband would make an interlinear translation into English, word by word with a dictionary. Next, it passed to Metz, who arranged the words in normal English grammatical order. Then it went to Orage, who put it into real English, idiom and style. Finally, Orage and I checked this translation against the Russian text, and after that we read it to Mr. Gurdjieff. I remember very well that several times Mr. Gurdjieff, who still did not speak much English, stopped Orage and said that the English did not at all correspond to his original idea. I had to translate again for Orage, trying to help him understand what Mr. Gurdjieff wished, although I myself was certain that Orage's translation was very exact. Finally, after many attempts, Mr. Gurdjieff was satisfied. Later, I understood that Mr. Gurdjieff knew very well that people accepted the first thought that came into their heads, but after thinking it over 2 or 3 times, they would notice some particular aspect that they had totally missed when they said something at once. It was not so important to him whether it was good or bad. He only wished to press us until ourselves understood more fully the meaning and were very exact with our language. When finally Mr. Gurdjieff approved the English translation, someone read it aloud in the evening to several people, and he watched the expressions on their faces. These readings continued late into the night. Sometimes even visitors were allowed to attend. Wow. Wow. Olga would type the Russian. Then Thomas de Hartmann would make an interlinear translation into English. Next, it passed to Metz. I don't know who Metz is, who arranged the words in normal English grammatical order, and finally to Orage. So, yeah, labor of love, as Donna says, but for all of them, I suppose, as well, for Orage too. So now this is back to Thomas de Hartmann. When Mr. Gurdjieff was considerably improved towards the spring of 1925, he decided to acquire a good new car. This was a blue Citroën with adjustable seats. It was brought to the Prieuré one Sunday after breakfast, and Mr. Gurdjieff immediately wanted to try it out. As we all felt sure that he still didn't see very well or have the speed and agility of movement that he formerly had, everyone began to object. He was angry and told my wife to go with him. They found some others willing to go along. Mr. Gurdjieff then circled around the village of Fontainebleau, and everything finished without a hitch. This was the beginning of many excursions, sometimes almost every day, crisscrossing France in all directions in winter cold and summer heat, with all kinds of difficulties, adventures, and breakdowns. He never travelled alone, but took with him in turn pupils to whom he wished to give new impressions and trials of attention and quickness of wit, and not only adults but also children, sometimes very small ones. On such trips the places were divided up as follows: 3 in the back seat, 3 more on the 2 folding seats in the middle, and 1 sitting beside Mr. Gurdjieff, who always drove. On these trips my wife went along and can better describe them. So here to finish the chapter we have Olga de Hartmann describing these wonderful trips. So Olga speaking. Oh dear, excuse me. Olga speaking. I had gone with Mr. Gurdjieff to arrange his driver's permit after his accident. The chief examiner was very nice, and there was no difficulty in renewing it. In fact, during lunch with us, the examiner asked me if I wished to have one too. I said, "But I don't know how to drive yet." He told me, "If you give me your word that you will not drive before an examiner says, 'Now you can have a license,' I will give you one today." And so he did, but I never seemed to have time to learn. I always had to go with Mr. Gurdjieff to find rooms, arrange everything, and translate for him. One terribly hot day we arrived in Vichy. Mr. Gurdjieff was quite tired and asked me to take the car to the garage to make sure that everything was in order so that we could continue travelling the next day. As I still did not know how to drive a car, he asked Mrs. Orage to go with me. The car was big, and I don't know how Mrs. Orage hit a peasant cart. Although there was no damage, we stopped at once and a crowd appeared. They sent for the police. We had to sit and wait for the arrival of the policeman, and I told her to prepare her driver's license and papers so that things could go quickly. She answered that she had left her license in America. This was very bad because at that time if someone drove without one, they could be sent to jail. Since I had my driver's license, even though I had never driven a car, I told her, "Let us quickly change our places before the policeman comes." I had to listen to a great discourse by the gendarme about how awful I was and how could I drive such a big car without knowing how to drive properly. And of course I had to suffer on my own head all of the bad feelings of the crowd. Having made his report, the gendarme told me I could go home. But now how could I go? I didn't know how to drive. I told the policeman, "Well, I am so nervous about everything that has happened that I really do not want to drive, so will you permit my friend to drive? She knows how to drive very well, but has left her permit at home." So he said, "All right." Mrs. Orage took the car safely to the garage, and we peacefully went home to lunch, not telling a single word to Mr. Gurdjieff. One day Mr. Gurdjieff told Madame de Salzmann that he wished that her son, who was then only 3 years old, would accompany us on a particular trip. I don't remember who else was to go that day, but Madame de Salzmann, realizing that she had to be there on time, was already in the back seat of the car with the child between her knees when Mr. Gurdjieff, who always drove, came down to set off. He asked Madame de Salzmann, "What are you doing here? I said your son has to come, but not you." She certainly was horrified and said, "How can he go without me? He's only 3 years old." Mr. Gurdjieff said, Tell Madame de Hartmann everything that is necessary for your son. She has no children. She has to learn. Now I was as horrified as his mother. She told me quickly that her son would never eat too much and refused if he did not want any more. She asked that he sleep in my room and that I let him sit on the pot in the morning until his bowels moved. Important points for the children. I understood how important this was and that I should not let him leave until he had finished. However, he just sat on the pot as if it were a car and drove it all round the room. In 2 days, his father also joined us, and Mr. Gurdjieff asked the little boy if he wished to go with his father or stay with Madame de Hartmann. The child did not answer. Then Mr. Gurdjieff asked again, "Well then, if it were so good, do you wish to stay with her?" The child said, "No, very good with her, but very tiring." These trips, often to holiday places, were nothing like conventional holidays. They continued to be learning experiences for everyone, often in most unexpected ways. A task given to one person might seem like nothing at all to the others, but cause much inner suffering to the one who had to find the strength to perform it. And on the contrary, a task that might seem cruel to everyone else could bring an experience of growth and understanding to the one who received it. One incident will perhaps illustrate how well Mr. Gurdjieff understood the inner life of people and how he could sense it even at a distance. We were coming back from a trip late one winter evening. I felt that Mr. Gurdjieff was driving too fast and recklessly. My nervousness was aggravated by the fact that my husband was also in the car. Mr. Gurdjieff realized it very well, so when I could not stand it and asked him to drive more carefully, he scolded me roughly, saying that I was not to interfere in what he was doing. I did not take this well, feeling that I was right, and I answered him, quite unaware at that moment of what I was doing, in a tone I should not have used with my teacher. Mr. Gurdjieff stopped the car. I got out and my husband followed me. Mr. Gurdjieff went on. It was a cold winter's night and neither of us was wearing a warm coat. We thought of asking a passing car to drive us home, but Mr. Gurdjieff himself came back to get us. We drove to the Prieuré in heavy silence. The following days I tried to avoid him because I was still trembling with anger. 2 days passed and I began to think, how could I behave so toward my teacher? A kind of remorse arose in me. I went to a room in the Ritz corridor where almost nobody but I had the right to go, and I sat there beginning to think deeply about myself in an absolutely new way. Just at that moment the door of the room opened and I saw Mr. Gurdjieff enter. In a voice and manner in which there was no reproach, nothing to remind me of what had happened, he said, "I was looking for you. I have a lot to be typed. Come quickly." And that, my friends, is the end of tonight's reading. A very fascinating and wonderful account of the terrible catastrophic car accident, and then, of course, the new direction that the work would take, and Olga documenting the very first time that Mr. Gurdjieff began to dictate Beelzebub's tales, and the back and forth with Russian and English and all of the difficulties that surrounded Mr. Gurdjieff's crash and the aftermath, you could say, where people, when he's getting healthy, they don't know, should they push back, should they be trying to coerce him? But then, of course, he got his strength back and everything went on as normal. And, of course, now we have the legacy that is Beelzebub's tales to his grandson. And the rest of the series, and also all of the other accounts of people that were with Mr. Gurdjieff. Donna Harper says, "Epic tales," with clapping emojis. Donna, you're very welcome. It's nice to see you. Philo also is clapping, so bravo. And Tatiana's Design says, "It seems strange to me that Margaret Anderson did not mention the accident, even though she moved there 1 month before it happened." And are you talking about Tatiana, the Unknowable Gurdjieff, right? Isn't that Margaret Anderson's book, The Unknowable Gurdjieff? Maybe, yeah, well, who knows? Again, who knows why these people don't include, why they include one thing and not another. Jiam says, "Was Gurdjieff in the secret space program?" I suspect he was, and I've never heard anything about a secret space program, but who knows, Jam? And hello there, Oslo Tafelmuskik, or Musik, says, "Thank you for the nice reading. When you plan to read again? This time tomorrow." Oslo, but a bit earlier than we began. 8:30 tomorrow, we will read part 4 of J.G. Bennett's Talks on Beelzebub's Tales. Work, I believe it's called. So if anyone likes the effortful intention and work aspect of Mr. Gurdjieff's teaching, then you'll be sure to join us tomorrow with J.G. Bennett discussing these things from his perspective, having been with Gurdjieff, having studied Beelzebub's Tales, and having permission from Gurdjieff to give some lectures on the book. So tomorrow, which is Tuesday, I think Tuesday it is, we'll read Bennett's Talks on Beelzebub's Tales. I think on Wednesday we'll go back to Don Quixote, and then Thursday morning we will finish. We will finish that book. The final chapter, or the final part, sorry, is called Reality. And then I think I'll do a poll, because Donna, looks like Donna wants some Enid Blyton. She says, I thought you was going to say Enid Blyton there for a second. Well, there's no shame in Enid Blyton. So I think I'll do a poll once I've finished Bennett. The poll will consist of: begin the next Bennett book, Gurdjieff Making a New World, carry on with Don Quixote, a little Roald Dahl, or a little Enid Blyton. So quite the mixture here at Book Club. We don't discriminate. We don't discriminate between philosophy and metaphysics and books for 5-year-olds, because they're all wonderful, in my opinion, and they all have something different. They all have something to offer, whether it's just a nice way for one to doze off to sleep, or for one to explore their inner life and everything in between. So that's what we do here at Book Club, and I don't discriminate. The channel is certainly trying to be pulled over to be a Gurdjieff channel, because that's where people seem to be engaging the most, but I feel that I must hang on to the Roald Dahl beginnings, the Platonic beginnings, and the Enid Blyton beginnings, and not forget where I came from. And so I won't do that, so don't worry. And if you don't like Enid Blyton, well, skip that live and wait for some more Gurdjieff. And if you don't like Gurdjieff, skip that reading and wait for some more Blyton or Roald Dahl. And Stephen says, so good to hear the reading, which I read decades ago and almost forgot. Who would believe how life encroached on the work? And yes, Stephen, and thank you so much, sir, for the kind super sticker. And yes, Stephen, that is the nature of life, to encroach on the work, as we've been talking about in some of the previous streams. The work is swimming against the current, going by the narrow road, whereas life without the work, without the spiritual practice and path, is going with the stream and entering at the wide gate. So this work is never easy, but in my opinion, from my experience, my brief experience, it's it's valuable, very valuable, and it can turn life completely around and awaken one. I suppose Gurdjieff would say, awaken one to what is real. And so I'll leave it there, I think. We'll waffle on for another 10 minutes saying goodbye. And hello there, Mikel Angelus. Welcome. And everyone, it was wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining and for your great comments. As I just said, I'll repeat tomorrow at 8:30. I'll set the stream up in the afternoon, so you'll find it. The part 4 of Bennett's Talks on Beelzebub. And I hope you'll join us, because it's a very valid and valuable aspect of the work. So, everyone, thank you. I always enjoy sharing these Gurdjieff readings, especially one as heartfelt and powerful and sincere as this one from the Hartmanns. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, whether you're here with us or on the catch-up. It's my pleasure to share these books with you. Good night to you all. Have a great rest of the week. And I hope you can make tomorrow evening for some more Bennett's talks on Beelzebub's Tales. Guys, take care. Look after yourselves. And I hope to see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.